The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody. Hope you're having a great weekend. My Celtics won again, so I'm really happy. Broke the Indiana bases, so they go into the next round of the NBA playoffs. So that makes my weekend okay. Hope your weekend's going well. All right, today's show is going to be primarily answering your questions. So, get ready with super chat questions. If there aren't any, we're in trouble. I have a few topics we can talk about. I'm sure there are others we can talk about, but super chat questions, that's the focus for today. I will start today's show by saying, if anybody out there knows Ray Dalio, the Bridgewater CEO with $18 billion, largest hedge fund in the world, and major critic of capitalism, I am hereby formally inviting Ray Dalio to debate me on the virtues or vices of capitalism. And we have a host institution, Clemson University, will host the debate. I'm sure it'll get a lot of publicity. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people in the audience. So Ray Dalio, wherever you are, I will send you a letter, email, note, something. I'll try to get a hold of you, but anybody who knows him, if anybody knows him, please pass on that. Love to debate him. I think it would be fun. He's smart. He knows his stuff, he says. Maybe not so much if you listened to my show the other day. But let's bring it on. Let's debate the virtues of or vices, in your case, of capitalism. All right. I'm taking questions from you on anything, pretty much. A few things happening in the world. You probably just saw today a big terrorist attack in Sri Lanka. About 200 people. It looks like at least 200 people killed. Many of the bombs went off in churches. Other bombs went off in hotels, in luxury hotels. So a lot of international casualties. A lot of tourists are probably being killed. So an attack on churches on Easter Sunday. I'm not going to comment too much on this because, Sri Lanka is a complicated country, and, we'll see what attribution is. The first thought is, particularly given the attacks on the churches, is that it's Islamic terrorists, but only 10% of Sri Lanka's population is Islamic. They have fought, there was a brutal civil war in Sri Lanka for many, many years with the Tamil Tigers. The Tamil Tigers were not Muslims, they were Buddhists. It is amazing how violent Buddhists can be. You would think Buddhism is a pretty calm, pretty relaxed, pretty pacifist ideology. Not in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, the Buddhists slaughter each other, and on top of that, they seem to slaughter everybody else. So is this related to Tamil Tigers? Is this Islamic terrorism in spite of that? Is this something else? Obviously targeting Christians, which is unusual for Sri Lanka. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see what is going to happen in terms of the data and the information that comes out of that. They've made some arrests, but I couldn't find any information about the identity of those being arrested. And supposedly they shut down Facebook and Twitter on the island because of rumors that they were circulating. So much more likely to be hyper-nationalist Buddhists than anything else, and Buddhists probably hate Christians as well. And again, so bizarre because we think of Buddhists as pacifists, but even in India, the Buddhists can get really, really, really nasty when fighting for stuff. All right, so let's see. We got 3 super chat questions. Let's see how far these questions take us. Action Jackson. is asking me a question I'm trying to avoid, and a topic I try to avoid. But he's got two questions. Oh no, one question. What is your opinion of current Mueller-Trump investigation situation? Do you think Elizabeth Warren should have called for impeachment? All right. You know, I've tried to avoid commenting too much on the Mueller-Trump because I'm so critical of Trump on so many issues that I find it, you know, whatever has been discovered by Mueller just par for the course. You know, what I would have expected for the kind of behavior that we have seen, you know, from Donald Trump as president. So, you know, I never thought much of this collusion with the Russians, although there was obviously stuff going on in the background with Russia, but I never thought that was a big issue. But with regard to this obstruction of justice, I mean, is there any doubt? Is there any doubt, given Trump's statements and given Trump's inclinations and given Trump's behavior, that he tried to obstruct the investigation and probably in the background did everything he could within the framework of what is, you know, reasonably legal to stop this investigation? I mean, sure he did. Is this my main problem with Donald Trump? No. I mean, he is a pragmatic, stand-for-nothing, scaremongering statist. That's and with a character with a really bad character. He's a obsessive liar. A bullshitter is better than a liar, because as I've said before, it's not that he lies in the conventional sense. It's that reality doesn't mean anything to him. He doesn't care about it one way or the other. He says, just like a pragmatist would, a real pragmatist would, whatever he thinks will get him his goal. And in that sense, he is much more of a pragmatist than I think any other president we've ever seen. So he's willing to do whatever. So did he want the investigation shut down? Did he do what he could to shut down the investigation? Probably, yes. Is this my main objection to Donald Trump? No, it's one more. Should Elizabeth Warren call for his impeachment? Well, what do you mean, should she? She's running for president in a very crowded Democratic field. The front runner right now, by I think quite a bit, is Bernie Sanders. There's this other guy, this gay mayor of a city I can't remember, who is getting a huge amount of press and getting a huge amount of visibility, and is doing really well. You know, we'll see if it lasts. We'll see if he has. I can't even pronounce his family name. So, Buttigieg. Anyway, he is very affable, very charismatic, seems to be charming people, getting a lot of press. I think the press is quite enamored with him. And Elizabeth Warren needs some attention. She needs to stand out above the field. And just debating me, as she has said she would do in September, is not going to get her that attention. So she needs to engage in something, in something that will get her onto the front pages of the papers, and this is a good thing. I mean, a lot of the other Democratic leaders are against impeachment. They don't think it'll really get them anywhere, and they think it'll just, and I think they're right, I think it'll just, energize Donald Trump's base and just make them a target of his base. But I don't know. Politics is not my specialty in terms of politics, in terms of predicting what the electoral people who vote will do. I have no idea. But so Elizabeth Warren is here to try to get some attention, and I think she can't lose here, right? First of all, she's in the Senate. The Senate is most likely not going to impeach Trump unless some new revelations come out that are far more extreme than what we've seen. So most of the action will happen in the House, and she's get her names in the paper. There's no downside here for her, than to say this. It's red meat for the base. She comes out looking like she's militant and she's really angry and she wants to defend to defend the American people, those people at least who want to impeach Trump. And, so again, no downside and lots of upside in terms of publicity. And I think that's all that matters. I mean, again, the House impeaches, the Senate does this trial kind of thing. The Senate still has to vote. But the House has to pass it on to the Senate, and nothing will happen in the Senate. So, they can't get rid of the president without both houses. By large votes, I think the Senate has to vote 2/3 for getting rid of the president to make that happen. So, ain't happening. But, Elizabeth Warren has nothing to lose by doing it. Oh, Abton. Oh, my God. He's asking me psychological questions. Like, what do I know about these things? All right. What causes procrastination and how can it be overcome? What causes procrastination and how can it be overcome? I think there are a lot of different causes for procrastination. I don't think there's one cause for it. I think different people... I think it's a behavior that is driven by probably a wide variety of different psychological phenomena that does it. I know people, for example, who procrastinate because it's easier to fail if they procrastinate. So here's the logic. Logic in quotes. Here's the thinking. If I have lots of time to prepare and work and really work hard at it and get it all done and get it prepared, and I fail, that's a major failure. That's a huge knock against me. I can't handle that. But if I procrastinate, if I make up reasons why I can't do it now, and I delay, and everything is very much at the last minute, then I can rationalize it to myself as, well, I didn't have time to do it. So the failure is not as big of a failure. Of course, it's as big of a failure, if not a bigger failure, because you didn't even try and you, at some level, know it. But you can rationalize it away, so the rationalization can work. So I think that kind of anxiety from failure is part of it. I think part of it is some people procrastinate because the alternative requires effort and they're lazy. Now, what is the psychology of laziness? I don't know. I mean, some people just don't want to engage, and I don't know what the cause is. It's some people don't want to focus their mind and put in the energy and do what's necessary to get stuff done. They just don't want to do it, and the effort is easier when there's a deadline. It's right here. Time is running out. I have to do it, and they can bring up the energy at that point. And I'm sure there are all kinds of psychological reasons holding them back from exercising that energy earlier. But they need the deadline, and I find I procrastinate. So why do I procrastinate? I don't always procrastinate, but I sometimes procrastinate. Partially I like the stress of the clock ticking down, and that's probably not healthy, and it's probably not psychologically good. But I find I function better when I'm under the gun than I do if I start earlier and I don't wait on it to the last minute. I just enjoy, I guess, the thrill of maybe failing. I think some people procrastinate because they don't like what they do. They hate it. So they'd rather just condense it into a shorter period of time of pain, and just do it at the last minute. I don't have any deeper insight into it. I mean, I'm sure it's significantly, it can be linked to self-esteem, and again to this idea, I'm no good, I can't do it, I can't get it done, and procrastination is you know, is a way of you know, then all you have, then you do it when you have to do it, and then when you fail, it just reinforces, yeah, I knew I wasn't any good. I knew. So it just reinforces that negative view that you have of yourself, of your own ability. Did Rand ever write on the subject of vigilante justice? Also, what are your thoughts on art promoting vigilantism, such as Equalizer or Death Wish? So, of course, you know, I mean, it depends what you mean by vigilante justice, and I want to be careful here because I haven't thought about the definition of vigilante justice. I mean, is vigilante justice the idea of, in a lawful society, taking the law into your own hands? Or would you include under vigilante justice in a unlawful or in a civilization that's breaking down, in a sense, taking the law, but there is not much law, into your own hands? And I do think there's a significant difference between the two. So, of course, the one example of what you could think of as vigilante justice, but I'm not sure if it falls, I'm not sure, it depends how you exactly define vigilante, and I don't have a good definition right off the top here, is, you know, oh my God, Ragnar in Atlas Shrugged, the pirate, right? I mean, what is he doing? There is a law of the land, and he is violating that law. The law is completely irrational. The law is, you know, the government is using force against its own citizens. There's no protection of individual rights. There's a complete abandonment of the role of government as protecting individual rights. It's now just a rush to thuggery. And Ragnar goes out and builds a warship and goes out and you know, takes the wealth that's being stolen by the government from the producers and gives it back to them. So in that sense, one of the most heroic characters in Ayn Rand's novels, under those circumstances and willing to suffer the consequences of being caught, is a pirate who is taking back what was his. So I would say, first of all, this kind of justice, in a sense outside of the law, must be just, right? Must be just objectively, not just subjectively, but objectively just. To the best of one's ability, it has to be. You know, it can't just be acting on emotion. It has to be thought through and secured that there's justice. I mean, the real problem with vigilantism and why Ayn Rand spoke against it in a free society, or even in a semi-free society, is its lack of objectivity. It's the danger of losing objectivity, right? And that's why it's really, really important. It's really, really important to, if whoever does it, and I'm not advocating for it, but in the case of Ragnar, for example, and we'll get to Equalizer and Death Wish, to do it in a way that is objectively demonstratable to the better people in the culture, to the people, you know, in the culture that matter. And if you remember, Ragnar keeps really, really, really detailed records of who he's taking the money from, who the money actually belongs to. He is clearly doing this as an act of justice, of objective justice. Now, I have to say that I really enjoy most, not all, vigilante movies. So I really enjoyed the Equalizer movie 1 and 2 with oh my God, one of my favorite actors whose name has slipped my mind, but one of you is going to tell me who it is. Right? And so, yeah, Denzel Washington is the actor. So I really enjoyed the Equalizer movies. Death Wish I watched in the 70s, and I think a lot of the sympathy and a lot of the energy around Death Wish was Bronson was the actor, and it had a lot to do with the fact that during the late 70s, crime was rampant. So if you take Donald Trump's statement about carnage in the streets of America, I mean, it has no objective merit in the world in which we live in today, has no reality. But in the period of the 1970s, there was really massive amounts of violence, particularly in New York City. New York City was unbelievably dangerous and violent. You wouldn't walk in Central Park during the day, never mind at nighttime. And there was a sense that the police were not doing their job, that there was no justice, that also this is a time of criminal justice reform, a bad form of it, where violent criminals were let loose and let go, where people were getting relatively short sentences for violent crimes. And there was just a sense in American society that there was nobody standing up for the innocent victims of violent crime. And Charles Bronson, I think it was Charles Bronson, the actor in Death Wish, represents kind of an everyday man who stands up against the violent thugs and then has to protect himself and defend himself. And so he goes around. First it's kind of encounter. He's not looking for it, but ultimately, if I remember the movies right, he is going out and looking for the rapists and the murderers and killing it. And let me be very clear. One should try never to get into a situation where you live in a society where that is the case, because that's anarchy. And once people start taking the law into their own hands, everything breaks down. Now, in the case of Atlas Shrugged, taking the law into your own hands is part of the effort the strikers are making to bring about the end of civilization. So it's not neutral. It's not trying to save civilization. It's an effort to destroy civilization, because once the rule of law is gone, once there is no government, once what we have is anarchy and violence in the streets, civilization is finished. And in a sense, what the strikers are trying to do is accelerate the end of civilization. And in that sense, the pirate, Ragnar, is doing what he's doing in the context of a bigger mission. He's not just doing it as a vigilante, as I'm going to go after these guys. He's doing it as part of the bringing down the world. He's doing it part of a war that John Galt and the rest, and if you haven't read Atlas Shrugged, close your ears, the war that John Galt and the rest have initiated against, think about it as a war of independence. So it's not a simple act of vigilantism. And indeed, if you start engaging in vigilantism, and if you start embracing that idea, what you get is the destruction of civilization, the move towards anarchy, the move towards violence. And while I enjoy the movies because I enjoy the idea of justice, and it horrifies me when government doesn't execute that justice, and I can sympathize emotionally, and that's what the movies capture, is that sympathize emotionally with the idea of going out and striking back at the bad guys when the government doesn't. I don't think, and Ayn Rand wrote about this, I don't think, unless it's part of a bigger plan, I don't think, and unless civilization is really collapsing, that it's justified, that it's legit to do, right? As long as we live in a semi-free society, as long as we're not in rebellion, which is what the strikers are, as long as we're not in rebellion against the society in which we live. But I have to say, I enjoy revenge movies. So there was a movie I saw recently about a woman whose husband and kids are brutally murdered, and because of corruption in the legal system, the murderers get off, and she goes and gets trained as this super duper amazing assassin, and she comes back and she kills them all. How can you not like it, right? But I can like it as art and still believe that there are mechanisms in a civilized society, which I still think we have, to deal with the real bad guys without resorting to individuals taking guns and dealing with it independently. And this is, of course, what happens in anarchy. And anarchy, we go back to dueling in the streets. We go back to the absence of the objectivity of due process, the absence of, there's a whole system of law. And it's pretty beautiful. If you really think about our criminal legal system, how amazing it is. We have a whole system of due process. We have a whole system of what is legitimate evidence collection. We have a whole system of a trial by jury with a bunch of procedural requirements, all to protect the innocent, all to make it difficult to prosecute criminals, because it's so important for us to be objective and to protect the innocent. We are so fearful of power in the hands of those who have guns, who can then pervert it, distort it, or just get sloppy. We really take seriously, or at least the law takes seriously, in the way it's been created in this country, is the assumption that you are innocent until proven guilty. And that is such an important feature of the law, and we built so many of those protections that then to say, but if you feel like an injustice has been committed, go out into the streets and kill whoever. I mean, that is devastating. That is horrible. So no, it's the rule of the jungle. It's really, really bad. And again, in the context of Atlas Shrugged, it is within the context of a revolution. It's in the context of bringing down civilization, of declaring war on civilization. And that's something completely different. Revolution is something different. So while I enjoy vigilante movies, guilty as charged, I find vigilanteism abhorrent in a civilized society. And when vigilanteism is the only way to achieve justice, then it's time for the revolution. It's time to move to another country, or it's time to replace the government in the existing country. It's time to revolt, to really have a revolution. So, yeah, I mean, I want to emphasize how important I think the nature of our legal system and its attempt to prosecute justice objectively is. It's one of my arguments against anarchism. That all breaks down. It all goes away. There is no objectivity in the prosecution of criminals in an anarchist society. Indeed, I've seen many anarchists argue that in an anarchist society, there is no criminal law. There is only civil law. If somebody murders you, your wife will sue them. I mean, that is such an evasion of reality that it's mind-boggling. And of course, again, by what process is that lawsuits prosecuted? Well, whatever the parties have negotiated, or whatever the two legal organizations, the two police organizations of the competing parties have decided, or whoever. Objectivity is out the window. In a sense, truth is ultimately out the window. You mentioned Ludwig von Mises' epistemology of praxeology is wrong. One of his students, George Reisman, in his 1,100-page treatise, Capitalism, tries to correct these errors. Any thoughts on his book? So, I mean, there's a lot of amazing stuff in that book. So it's an encyclopedia. I've learned a huge amount from George Reisman's book on capitalism. It's a massive. It's not just 1,100 pages. It's big pages with tight type. It's a massive book. So I've learned so let me just say, I've heard a huge amount from it. I learn a huge amount every time I read one of George Reisman's essays. He is brilliant in many respects. He has insights that are truly stunning, and that about economics and about politics and about the way the world works. You know, I often read an essay of his and you just scratch my head. You know, how come nobody else has thought of this? It makes so much sense, but nobody else has. So he is often really brilliant. However, I think he's picked up a lot of Mises's methodology. So I think a lot of the epistemology and methodology is wrong. And he says in the introduction of his book on capitalism, and this is where you begin to get his error. He says that economics is a deductive field. Basically, you get certain basic axioms and everything else is deducible from those axioms. Now, I think like every science, that is wrong. Like for every science, that is wrong. I don't think economics or new truths in economics can be deduced. I think economics is dominantly an inductive science. An inductive science, one induces from observations. And one comes up with principles, and then one applies those principles. And so it's an interaction between induction and deduction. And as a consequence, a lot of his writing is very deductive and rationalistic, floating. So I think the book has problems in that regard. And I think too much of that, with Mises, it's directly from Kant, Kantian, kind of divorced from reality, kind of deductions. Although, again, because Mises is a genius, he manages somehow to connect it to reality. That's his explicit methodology. I think Reason buys into some of that. Obviously not explicitly, because he considers himself an objectivist, so he's trying to link it to reality. But I think he doesn't link it up right, and as a consequence, some of his arguments just don't make sense, are not correct, and are not convincing, because they're not linked to the phenomena in reality. They come out of this deductive process from basic principles. And real truth-seeking is if you listen to Leonard Peikoff's course, all new truths are the inductive truths. Now, you need deductive logic to test those truths out, and you can deduce from those truths implications of them. But the essential activity of the scientist is induction, and that is true in economics. All right. You have said that the government should not own property. Is there any exception for the national defense in cases in which security might be compromised by leasing an office building that may be bugged? No, I don't think so. I don't see any reason why you can't secure an office building from bugs. I mean, the technology certainly exists. Leasing it from reputable companies, leasing vast quantities of land in order to build a base, and maybe the leases are 99-year leases, but long-term leases that actually protect you. So I don't think that ownership, I can't think of a situation where ownership is required for national defense. Now, look, there's a sense in which the weapons the government has, it owns. There's a sense in which the money it has in the bank, it owns. There's a sense in which, you know, I don't know, the stationery it's bought, it owns. But it's not exactly ownership. Because I think ownership can only be private, can only be by a private entity, by somebody you can say, here, these people own it. A government definition is not anybody specifically. So I don't think the concept of ownership directly applies to it, and I think certainly there's no reason for it to own land, but and in some ways the everything that it has at the, what's the word I'm looking for? At the behest, at the permission of the citizens. That is, it is the citizens' servants, and anything it has is really the citizens' and if the citizens don't fund the government, then the government can't maintain any of it, and it's all gone. It has no meaning. So I think you have to understand that the idea of ownership applies to the government differently than it applies. It doesn't really apply to the government in the sense in which it applies. Private ownership doesn't apply to the government in the sense that it doesn't have property rights, and everything except the stuff that it absolutely is necessary for the execution of its role. That it be under their complete control, like a weapon system or something like that. I think should be leased. Now, I'm sure you could come up with some scenario in which owning a piece of land was necessary for the reasons you mentioned, for some kind of national security reasons. Okay, then I wouldn't have a problem with it. But again, I think the whole issue of ownership is, you have to think of it differently because it's the government. Okay, Action Jackson says, the FBI arrested leader of an armed group that is stopping immigrants after they cross the U.S.-Mexico border into New Mexicans. Do civilians have a right to patrol the border? Only the Fed Border Patrol. I mean, you don't have a right to walk around with a gun and point that gun at somebody who is not threatening you. Who is not threatening you and is not committing a violent crime. So you're not doing it as an act of self-defense. So you don't have a right to point a gun at people who are not committing a crime. So, I mean, this is vigilantism, but yes, vigilantism against people who are not even committing a violent crime. So I have almost no sympathy for it. Now, if it's your land, if you own the land, and you've got a sign out, no trespassers, and you're patrolling your land on the border, then fine. Then it's your property. You're defending your property against people who are violating your rights by entering your property without permission. But if it's not your property, and it's not your friend's property who invited you to be on their property, if it's not private property, then no, you can't go into the public space with a gun and point it at people because they're doing things that you think objectionable. Right? I mean, it's. I don't think even a shoplifter, would you point a gun at a shoplifter? I mean, I don't think so. I think you point a gun when the issue is violence. When the issue is violence. I mean, maybe a shoplifter because it's a violation of property rights, and but it would depend on the circumstances. To what extent was there a real threat? What were they stealing? Are they stealing a bottle of water? Are they stealing, or are they robbing a bank, right? So, and notice that I'm thinking on my feet here, guys, on a lot of these questions, and just for what it's worth, right? It's not, my answers are not ready-made, right? I don't have a list of the answers to all questions. Objectivism doesn't work that way. You have to work through the answers. So hopefully it's valuable to you to see me try to work through these. So I don't think crossing the border it's not a violent crime. It's not a property crime. You're not entering somebody's property and theoretically a threat. You're not stealing anything from anybody. I mean, fine if you want to patrol the border and call the border patrol if you see somebody crossing the border. That's absolutely within your right and fine and no problem. But to point a gun, that is mob rule, and absolutely somebody like that should be arrested. Absolutely. Right? We don't run the country with, by gang rule. We don't run the country by vigilantes. We don't run the country with militias. Militias don't run the United States of America. I mean, again, unless you're willing to declare civil war. Let's see. Was Frank Lloyd Wright the influence for the Fountainhead? Yeah, in many respects he was. There's no question. I mean, Ayn Rand was an admirer of his architecture, studied his architecture. Certainly so the influence in the sense of architecture, yes. So, and there's a certain level of parallel between Rourke and Frank Lloyd Wright, even in their life. Frank Lloyd Wright was not a trained architect. Neither was Rourke. Of course, Frank Lloyd Wright was an engineer. Frank Lloyd Wright, went through long period of time where he got no commissions, built nothing, and people turned him down because he was too radical, it was too different, was too new, was too provocative, and wanted to build, and certainly Frank Lloyd Wright built the way he wanted to build, no matter what. But I don't think Frank Lloyd Wright was the model for Rourke's unique and revolutionary moral character. I think that moral character is all Ayn Rand. That is her portrayal of the ideal man, and I don't think Frank Lloyd Wright was that man. So that integrity, that certainty that he had, that ruthless pursuit of his own rational long-term self-interest, or just self-interest, right? That clear understanding of what constituted his self-interest and his unwillingness to compromise at all. I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright was an admirable man, but I don't think Ayn Rand knew that necessarily at the time, and I don't think he's quite as admirable, certainly not explicitly as admirable as Howard Rourke is. I mean, Howard Rourke embodies in his character, in his actions, in the way he thinks about the world, a whole new morality, a whole new code of ethics. It would have been almost impossible to be Howard Rourke before Howard Rourke was written, right? Because Howard Rourke already understands, think about the speeches, what an individualistic morality would constitute, even though Ayn Rand hasn't fleshed out the entire philosophy yet, certainly not even the entire moral philosophy yet. She did to a large extent in the character of Rourke. How well was Objectivism being received in Asian cultures in comparison to Western cultures? Well, I mean, it's too early to say to a large extent because it's only been introduced into Asian cultures, I'd say, over the last 10, 15 years with the translations of Atlas Shrugged into Chinese and Japanese and some of Ayn Rand's books into Vietnamese and Korean. So it's still new in Asian countries. I think it's foreign to them. The two ideas that heart of Objectivism have some thread that connects them to the Enlightenment, to ideas that are at the core of Western philosophy. That is the reason is man's basic means of survival, and one's own life is the purpose of morality, the achievement of one's own life, individualism, moral individualism, have some roots in Western society, whether it goes back to Greece and Aristotle, whether it goes to the Enlightenment, whether it goes to the pursuit of happiness and the Declaration of Independence, and Thomas Jefferson's declaration of bring everything before reason is so. I think that it's much more reasonable that these ideas would resonate with Western audiences because there's this base within Western philosophy, within Western ideas. There's some foundation for these ideas. In the East, there was never an Aristotle and there was never an Enlightenment. So it's all new to them. Now, the flip side of that, so in that sense it's hard, right? It's really hard. The flip side of that is they don't have Christianity. So they have mysticism, and mysticism is very, very well grounded, unfortunately, in both Japanese and Chinese culture. It is a mysticism of superstition. It is a weird, primitive, very primitive form of mysticism. All kinds of forces in the world fighting. It's not even. It's not as sophisticated a mysticism as Christianity or Judaism. It's a very primitive form of mysticism. So I think one can get over it easier. And then they don't have altruism in the Christian sense. They don't have Jesus on the cross looking down at you, expecting you to sacrifice as he did for the sake of others, not suffering for the sins you commit, but for the sins of others as the grand moral statement of the ages. They don't have altruism as self-sacrifice for others who are remote from you. The worst, they have two forms of altruism. One is to family, a dedication of family that goes beyond reason, a dedication to family that is ultimately altruistic, but it's not held as an ideology. And again, therefore, can be overcome. And then, like the Confucianist respect for authority and Jordan Peterson should really like this, right? It's like the lobsters. It's like a hierarchy. Hierarchy is very, very important, or was very, very important in Chinese culture. Most of Confucius' writings about how to treat those beneath you and those above you, and how to manage, his ethics in a sense is how to manage your relationship with those under you hierarchically and above you hierarchically. But it's also about hierarchy. Society is hierarchy. Society, and so there's a sense in which that can be altruistic. But neither of those forms of altruism, family or hierarchy, or even the nationalisms that sometimes get riled up in places like China and certainly in Japan, neither one of those is as deep, as philosophical, as entrenched, I think, as Christian altruism is in the West. And the thing about Christian altruism is not just that it comes packaged with this religion that answers all the questions you need and provides you with this relatively sophisticated, mystical view of God and a whole ideology that's wrapped up with. But it also has been secularized. So Christianity has been secularized through Kant and through German Romantic philosophy. It's been secularized. The altruism in particular has been secularized, and of course the anti-reason has been secularized. So Christianity dominates morality in secular society as well as in religious society. And I don't think Eastern cultures have that. So I'm curious, 20, 30 years down the road, to what extent Ayn Rand will have been influential in Eastern cultures, given, on the one hand, it's harder for them because they don't have any base to place it on. On the other hand, her rejection of altruism and mysticism should be easier for them because they're less entrenched in their cultures. Greg Salameri points out about the previous discussion about Frank Lloyd Wright and Howard Roark and the Fountainhead. He points out that there's an essay in Robert Mayhew's book on the Fountainhead, which is a brilliant book. I heavily recommend it. Robert Mayhew's book of essays on the Fountainhead. All his books of essays on Ayn Rand's novels are brilliant. They've got some fantastic essays in them. Greg himself has a number of excellent essays in the books. Anyway, there's one by Michael Berliner, the former executive director of the Ayn Rand Institute, who writes about this relationship between Frank Lloyd Wright and Roark, and he uses a lot of material from the archives in terms of what Ayn Rand actually said and wrote about that relationship between, and her relationship more broadly with Frank Lloyd Wright, which is interesting. So I strongly recommend getting a copy of Robert Mayhew's book of essays on the Fountainhead, and of course all the other ones. But look up for that essay in particular if you're interested in this question. Okay, so here's a question. You and Peter Schiff have been heroic advocates of capitalism in the media. you often make a moral case while Peter argues a consequential basis for capitalism. Any thoughts on why he sidesteps the moral case? Well, because I don't think he necessarily believes it or that he thinks it's important. And again, I don't want to speak for Peter, so let me broaden this to Austrian economists more broadly. I just think so many economists that I know, most economists I know, just don't think morality is that important. They think people are what you would call utility maximizers. They do what's in their so-called self-interest anyway. And that capitalism just leaves them alone to be able to do that, and that if you leave them alone, that they tend to do generally the right thing, where right is defined in this vague notion of self-interest. But right really defined ultimately as utilitarian, as good for society. So almost all the Austrian economists I know are consequentialists of one form or another. And the consequences are not consequences for the individual, but consequences for society more broadly. They have not been able to philosophically escape kind of the ideas of the utilitarians, the various forms of utilitarianism and consequentialism. And it's comfortable for them because economics can be viewed as this, we're going to describe the world in a way that maximizes something. Maximizes production, maximizes wealth creation. And if you view wealth creation and production as good, which they are, and then you say it's good for society, which properly understood, that's true, but few people properly understand it, then they're done. From their perspective, they're done. And they don't understand the role of morality. Yesterday or one of the days I was asked about psychological egoism, the fact, aren't we all, egoists? And they think that. In a sense, they don't think morality exists or matters. Or if they do, they think it's in the realm of religion. Some of them are religious. And, okay, well, that's what you do kind of with, the market takes care of lying, cheating, stealing, in the marketplace, but morality is what you do with your friends and your family, and you give a little bit of charity, and it has no real economic consequences, as their view. Now again, I don't know what Peter's view is explicitly about this. It could be that some of them say, look, the better ones, I would say, not our area of expertise. You objectivists do morality, we do economics. Almost none of them say that. Unfortunately, most economists view, many economists of the Austrian and Chicago schools of thought view all of human behavior as explained through the prism of economics. I'll give you an example, not from an Austrian economist, but from a Chicago economist, and of course his name has escaped me for the moment. That always happens. He won a Nobel Prize, and he's one of Milton Friedman's students. Anyway, he wrote a book about how marriage is an economic decision, and how we make decisions about who to marry based on economic principles. Now, that's nonsense. But you can kind of see the logic, and he runs through the logic, and it's kind of a cutesy argument, but it reminds me of evolutionary psychology. It's a cutesy argument that kind of makes sense in a particular context, but it's just not true. It's just not true. And so many economists believe that every human, because they view every human decision as being within this scope of you're maximizing your own utility. You're doing what is good for you, but not they don't think of what's good for you in the deep, long-term sense. They think of what's good for you. You're appeasing your wishes right now. Right? And they're often stumped when you say, well, is the cocaine addict maximizing the utility? Well, in a sense they are, because they're getting the high, but they get that long-term that hurts him, but maybe he has a high discount rate. You know what a high discount rate means? That means he values the present much, much more than he values the future. And who are you to judge whether he's not right, whether he shouldn't be maximized? So they're subjectivists. They're moral subjectivists. complete. There's no objective notion of what is good and what is evil. And almost all economists I know are moral subjectivists, unless they're religious, and then they've just separated the two out completely. Action Jackson asks me if it's a good time to do a long review of Game of Thrones. No, I'm going to wait until it's over. So give me the end of the season. I still haven't watched the season yet, but give me until the end of the season, and then I'll do the review of Game of Thrones. I think there's a lot to say about the Game of Thrones. All right, David Henstrom, or something like that. Thoughts about leading philosophers saying that it is not bad if humans would all die because we destroy nature, and people not having children because they cause climate change. Yeah. I mean, I've done a whole show, or a significant part of a show, covering this issue. You can look back and find it, covering both issues. So I think these ideas are evil ideas. I think they're anti-man, anti-human being ideas. They're anti-human life ideas, which is, I think, what the definition of evil is. The definition of evil is anti-human life. It's the negation of human life. And I think both those ideas are the negation of human life. They're placing an intrinsic value, a value in nature in and of itself. But Ayn Rand asks these key questions about value. And the two key questions about value, what is a value? Is this a value? She asks, to whom and for what? There is no such thing as value in and of itself, outside of a valuer. This is what is meant by an objective value. It has to be a value to somebody. And for, to be objective, a particular purpose. So what these philosophers do, and you're right to put philosophers in quotes, is they believe that value is out there. To some extent, Jordan Peterson has this view, right? Value is out there. And there's value whether you recognize it or not. It's value whether you're alive or not, Just like, that question about, does a tree make a sound in a forest if there's nobody there to hear it? Well, it depends what you mean by sound, right? If sound means that thing that a human or an animal consciousness hears, and there's no animal and there's no human consciousness, then it doesn't make a sound. If by sound you mean it generates the waves that in a human ear produce that sound, then in that sense it does make a sound, right? So the waves are there, but it takes a human consciousness to identify those waves as a sound. So the physical phenomena still happens. You need an observer, not to make the thing be a thing. A thing is what it is, but to give it meaning. Now, value is an abstraction. It's not a physical phenomenon. It's that which one gains, acts to gain or keep. But it's that one. There has to be a one. There has to be somebody. There has to be a human being. So nature is not a value outside of human existence. If there are no human beings on the planet, who is there that values nature? How can nature have a value independent of a valuer? It has none. It just is. It doesn't negate the existence of nature. Nature still exists. A is still A. Existence exists. One just can't apply moral terms to it. Morality is a human phenomenon. Only humans can value. Only humans can want. Only humans can see that thing is good for me. But it has to be good for you, and you have to see it as being good for you. So, to whom and for what? So, is nature a value? Well, to whom? What do you mean by nature first? And then to whom and for what? Well, yeah, trees have value because I get to chop them down and build buildings and make paper. And yeah, they probably do some stuff to the air. They clean the air and they probably help the soil. And yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of values that trees represent to me as a human being. And what is the greater value of a tree as a holder of the soil, as a cleaner of the air to the extent that they do that, or as wood and paper, depends on what is more valuable to me in the context of my life at a particular point in time, right? If I'm a farmer who is farming in the valley and the trees are keeping from mudslides into my farmland, from destroying my farmland or whatever, then I value the trees to holding the soil, and I might buy the forest in order to preserve it so it doesn't ruin my agriculture. If I'm a builder, the trees are more valuable to me as wood. So there are a variety of different reasons why I would value trees. And I, as an individual, have to decide which is more important to me. If I'm somebody who likes to take walks in the wood, then I value trees for their aesthetic beauty. Fine. But trees have no value outside of a valuer. Trees have no value outside of human beings. So it's what value do they have to me? What value do they have to us? As farmers, as human beings on planet Earth. And you have to say it depends on what we're doing, what stage we are in industrialization, how much wealth do we have we built all the houses we need, how much paper do we need to consume, what's the state of the air, what's the state of the agricultural land? I mean, there are all these questions you have to answer. So to view trees as valuable in and of themselves and to be willing to sacrifice human life for their sake, that is irrational, sloppy thinking, because again, what value do they have outside of human beings? And let's say you say, well, I value them because I like to take walks in the wood, therefore I am going to force you to preserve them. Well, wait a minute. How do you get to elevate your values above mine and use force, use coercion against me in order to preserve your values, even if they're not my values? So while I believe in an objective morality, I believe I can tell somebody, this is the way you should live your life, in the sense of these are the principles that would make your life better. And I think that's absolutely true, and I think the people who don't live by the principles, by rational principles, are not living a good life, are not living a complete life as human beings, and they suffer as a consequence. I cannot force somebody to live by those rules, partially because rationality requires that you choose to be rational. Otherwise, it's not being rational. Following orders is not being rational. And, of course, the most important virtue in objectivism is to be rational. So you can't force somebody to be rational. There's no way to do that. Rationality has to be a choice. So you can't use force, what these philosophers want to do. If you believe that you think the planet has value and it should be a value to me, then prove it to me. Argue for it. In the context of my life, in the context of human life. Don't argue for it in the context of it has a value independent of human life, because then you've lost me. I'm not interested. Thoughts on the culture of collectivism within team sports, sacrificing yourself for the team. Well, I don't think there is a culture of collectivism in team sports. I think the culture. I think there's the language of altruism in team sports, but not the culture of it. So, in basketball, people talk about sacrificing yourself for the team, but you're not, right? Passing the ball is not a sacrifice if it leads to a basket that helps you win. The goal is to win. Any more than doing a good job at work is a sacrifice. Or if somebody has a great idea at work, saying, yes, I love that idea, that's great. is a sacrifice because it's not your idea. No, when you buy into a company, when you buy into a sports team, you are joining a team dedicated to winning in a particular context. In a company, it's to make money. In a team, it's to win in the game. And you do what's necessary to achieve that because that is now your goal. You have voluntarily accepted it as your goal. And therefore, the actions you take in pursuit of that goal are not a sacrifice, even if in the short run it might seem like you're not making the most money in any given point in time, or you're not scoring the most points. But if you understand the way a business works, the business, and a good business, a business worth working for, is one in which the long-term profitability of business will lead ultimately to your success, including monetarily. So giving up some money early, to gain more later, is the equivalent of passing the ball rather than trying to score everything yourself. Okay, somebody says the lawlessness at the border is by design. It's greed. I'm not sure whose greed it is. I mean, it strikes me as the lawlessness at the border is by design of Trump, because this keeps it on the agenda, and it's obviously a winning message for him. It's a winning issue for him. I think the American people are really concerned about what's going on at the border. If you turn it into crisis, they bought into it. They've obviously bought into his messaging, and he has a strong interest to keep it at the forefront of the American consciousness going into an election, because it's a winning issue for him. It's a winning topic for the Republican Party, but particularly for Donald Trump. So I think what's going on at the border is ridiculous. It's a consequence of our stupid legal system and our stupid laws, not legal system, stupid laws relating to really ridiculous laws relating to immigration. And I've talked enough about immigration, but yeah, I mean it's an artificial crisis caused by our laws and by Donald Trump. And by the left, who's trying to exploit it for their own reasons. There's no question. So everybody's interest that this be an issue on the border, except the people who live in the border and the immigrants and the rest of us Americans. But it plays into the politics of both sides, and nobody wants to fix the laws because it plays into the politics of each side. Okay, are you familiar with financial speculators, traders, Monroe Charter, Victor Niederhoff? Both are fans of Ayn Rand, I believe. Both are fans of Ayn Rand. Both have been a brilliant, I wouldn't call them speculators, at least not Trout. Both have been brilliant traders in their time. Neither of them are formally in the financial markets today, as far as I know. But they've been stellar, amazing financiers in the past. Real successes, real amazing. Producer Chris asked, drug-wise, I would say if hurting others is wrong and self-abuse, even by drugs, should be equally taboo. Even though the human individual has rights to their own health, the group must clean it up. No, the group doesn't have to clean it up. Why should the group clean up your mess? So in a free society, if you take drugs and you die, nobody has to clean that up for you, right? If you just get sick, nobody has to treat you. Nobody's obliged to treat you. So no, I mean one of the beauties of capitalism is self-responsibility and the reinforcement of self-responsibility. If you take drugs, you suffer the consequence of the drugs. Nobody else should suffer the consequences of your drug taking. And that's true if you're obese, you suffer the consequence of being obese. If you eat badly, you suffer the consequences of eating badly. If you drive like a maniac and get into accidents, you suffer the consequences of getting into the accidents. Nobody pays your way. The group does not bail you out. That's the principle, one of the key principles of capitalism. And in that environment, drugs should be legal. Now, even today, I think drugs should be legal. because they create massive violence, massive distortions, and massive corruption in our legal system, particularly among police, but also among the judiciary. All right, good. So we got a lot of questions in there. Let me see. Yeah, we've done an hour and 10 minutes. That's pretty good. So, any final questions? You've got 2 minutes. I'll just end with this funny story because the nature one reminded me of this. Let me just find it. So it turns out that in the DMZ between South and North Korea, you know that area that is demilitarized. It's like this area where nobody goes into, and they've got guards on the North Korean side and guards on the South Korean side, and they're staring at each other with guns. But nobody goes in there, right? Nobody goes. It's demilitarized based on whatever agreement they came when there was a ceasefire between North and South Vietnam. Well, it turns out that because human beings have not entered the DMZ, well, wildlife is thriving there, thriving. And, so there are all kinds of animals going there because people don't shoot there because, oh my God, war could break out if you started shooting the animals. And people are not stepping there, and people are not polluting there, and people are not doing anything in that area. So nature is flourishing. So conservationists are really, really, really worried about what will happen if there's peace. They don't want peace. Because if there's peace, then human beings will disrupt the DMZ. And all this nature will go away. And this is exactly it. They value those animals, they value nature more than they value human life. And the safety of human life, the ability of human life to all the different ways in which we thrive when we have peace relative to not just violence, but the threat of violence. The threat of violence is very, what do you call it? It's very limiting. It makes it difficult to live and produce and be as happy as one could be without that threat being imposed on you. So as successful as South Korea is, think of us, how much it would boom, how much more successful it would be without the constant threat of violence. And, here you have the environmentalists telling you everything you need to know about this, in a sense that they don't care. They don't care about human thriving. They wouldn't care about human life. What they care about are some animals and some plants. And they would sacrifice human beings. They would sacrifice peace for the sake of them. All right, we have one final question came in. My thoughts on Passover. Is it good to revisit the history of one's enslavement? Well, if you were enslaved, it might be good to revisit that history. But I wasn't enslaved. Were you? You could argue that somebody from my genealogical line was once enslaved a long time ago. Why do I care? It's not my enslavement. I have no relationship with those people long time ago, and the gene pool has got pretty mixed up since then quite a bit. But even if it hadn't, what do I care? What spiritual, moral, any relationship do I have to those people? Now, it's always good to be reminded of the evils of slavery. And if Passover did that, then that would be great. But it doesn't really. And if the Jews had fought for their freedom against the enslaver, that would be interesting. But the Jews were passive. The Jews wouldn't fight for their own freedom. Indeed, the Jews begged Moses not to stir up trouble, not to try to free them. Life was, tolerable as slaves. At least that's according to the Old Testament, right? So what are we celebrating in Passover? That God freed the Jews from slavery. And how did he do it? By slaughtering Egyptians. First by bringing all kinds of plagues upon them, and Egyptians were pretty tough. So you know, they didn't give up on their slaves. They didn't want to give the slaves because of all these natural disasters that were happening to them. So God basically killed the firstborn of every Egyptian family. And how did he know? I mean, this is the bizarre thing about these kind of stories, right? God, all-knowing God, needed the Jews to mark their buildings, mark their condos, their apartments, their dwellings with blood on the door, so that the angel of death would skip over them and only kill the Egyptians. Now, I thought God was all-knowing. How come God needed a sign? Why didn't he just kill all the Egyptian children? Why did he need the Jews to mark their thing? Right? I mean, the Egyptians would have got the message. Jewish kids are alive, their kids are not. Right? I mean, these are the kind of things that when I was a little kid, when I read the Bible, was like, no, this doesn't make any sense. Come on, this is all just a story. Not a very good one either. Or at least not very consistent about the powers of God. And the Bible's full of these things. God is all-powerful, but, you know, and all-knowing, but you have free will. Really? How does that work? If he knows the future, how do I have free will? He knows what I'm going to do. So it's set. It's done. It's finished. I don't buy it. You know, maybe it'll come out in my debate with Ben Shapiro one day. So I'm not a big fan of Passover. Plus, it's this long dinner, and if you sing songs, then it's kind of entertaining. The songs are kind of fun, and if you have a fun family to sing it with, and you can turn it into fun. But the rest of it's like, if you really do it the way you're supposed to do it, it's boring and it's long, and you do it every year. And if you're outside of Israel, you have to do it twice, and a lot of it is irrelevant. And it's not about the Jews fighting for freedom. It's God giving them freedom. It's about Jewish passivity. And then God drowns the whole Egyptian army in the Red Sea. But that's okay. I'm okay with killing all the soldiers. It's those children and singling out the children, which is kind of interesting, right? It's not collateral damage. It's, I'm going to kill all these children, to force Pharaoh to do this. He could have wiped out the entire Egyptian army, just like that. He could have just wished it, and the entire Egyptian army would have died. And then the Jews maybe could have just left, walked out. But he had to kill every firstborn. Right? I mean, God is a brutal, nasty, really horrific, really violent, really vindictive creature. And I didn't buy into him from almost day one. Right? Lucas asks, I liked your financial advice episode. Are you planning to do more self-improvement episodes? I'm happy to do that. Give me some ideas, right? Send me an email, yaron@yaronbrookshow.com, with some self-improvement ideas, topics you would like me to cover, like self-improvement topics you'd like me to cover, and I'm happy to do it. I obviously know finance. I can say something about finance. But, you guys seem to value other stuff that I say. So send me a list of things, and if I have something to say about them, I will, and if I don't, I won't. How about that? It's hard for me, because I don't think of myself as a self-help guru, to come out and, okay, here's 5 steps to achieving your goal. Every morning you should say these 5 things to yourself, and you should brush your teeth from left to right or from right to left. And if you do that, then, I don't do that kind of stuff. So, and I'm making fun, and I shouldn't, because some of the self-help stuff is really, really good, and some of the self-help gurus are probably pretty good. But if you have particular topics in which you would like me to advise you on self-improvement, then I will choose those to comment on if I think I have something to say about them. Are you and Peter Schiff committed to doing your own version of the Free State Project in Puerto Rico? No, I don't think neither of us are committed. I mean, interested kind of vaguely, but no, I mean, we're not putting any resources into it. We're not thinking about it. I'm too busy. I'm sure Peter is too. He's got young kids. I've tried to change the world. And Puerto Rican politics is a mess. And I think under the charter in which I got my tax preferences, I think I need to be careful on what kind of political activism I do in Puerto Rico. So it's a little tricky. I have to look into it. But I mean, if I can do it, if the governor calls me up and wants advice, or if some political party in Puerto Rico wants me to help them, I'm happy to do it. But I'm unlikely to really participate, initiate. Put it that way, initiate. I'm just too busy doing other stuff. Okay, Matthew says he recommends The Bourgeois in America at the Milwaukee Museum of Art through May 12th. Then on to Memphis and San Diego. Oh, no, not Bourgeois. What am I talking about? Jeez, I can't read. It's pathetic. Bouguereau in America. Oh, wow. Almost worth going to Milwaukee. I won't be able to go before May 12th. Okay, I'll look this up. I love Bouguereau. Bouguereau in America. Milwaukee. Yeah, so I recommend Bouguereau. I definitely recommend going if you're close to these museums, and if not, make a trip. I don't know how many paintings are there, but probably a lot, because a lot of Bouguereau's paintings, he says 40 plus Bouguereau's. A lot of Bouguereau paintings were sold to American businessmen in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So a lot of Bouguereau's are actually in the United States, not in France. And Bouguereau is a 19th century French painter, one of my favorites. And actually in Puerto Rico, we have two particularly beautiful Bouguereaus. Bouguereaus that I haven't seen in books and other places. So particularly beautiful Bouguereaus are here at the Art Museum in Ponce, Puerto Rico. So I enjoy Bouguereau a lot. So I would actually go especially to museums. So I'm looking at San Diego. Hopefully to be there during the summer when I'm going to spend a little bit of time in California, and I'll go to the one in San Diego. So thank you, Matthew, for pointing that out. All of you out there, go find Bouguereau's. Mauritius just put in a thing. Is insurance a product of the altruistic ideal of collectivized cost and isolated benefit, or is it a rational method of spreading individual cost time? Absolutely a rational method. Absolutely a rational method. Insurance is a product of markets. It was started in the United Kingdom, insuring boats at Lloyd's. It is a completely market phenomena. It has nothing to do with collectivism. It has nothing to do with sacrifice. It is completely an issue of financially analyzing your risk and what your potential returns are, and whether insurance policy makes sense for you to buy or not. And an insurance company putting a price on it, not based on sacrifice, but based on how can it make money. And you have to buy the insurance policy only if it gives you a financial return, expected financial return, not actual financial return, an expected financial return that is in your interest or not. So it is a purely rational. I mean, it depends on the policy and depends on the cost, but as an industry, it's a completely rational product, a rational industry, and based on your time preferences and costs and financial situation. And I think one of the things that and this is where I disagree with George Reisman. I think George Reisman has made the case that insurance is collectivistic. I completely and utterly disagree. I think it's completely rational. And as a finance guy, I can sit down and show you how it could be rational. Somebody's asking, is being Puerto Rican a type of dual citizenship? No, it's an American citizenship without being able to vote for president and for Congress. But you have an American passport. All right. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a rest of a wonderful Sunday. I will probably be talking to you on Tuesday with Amy, and then probably on Thursday and over the weekend. Much more commentary in the future. Please share the show. Share it to your friends. Let people know that you like this, that you enjoy it. Share. It's the most important thing you do on social media. And of course, those of you who value what I do, I appreciate the support that you provide. You can go and provide the support on subscribestar.com /Yaron Brook Show, or at yaronbrookshow.com/support, where you can use PayPal, both to give a one-time gift and to do kind of a perpetuity, to give a regular monthly contribution, which is fantastic. And thank you for all the hundreds of you who do that already. So, but I would really value it if more of you did it, right? Because a lot of you are listening to your show and not supporting the show. Hope you're getting a value out of it. Would appreciate you returning that value by supporting the show through yaronbrookshow.com/support or subscribestar.com/yaronbrookshow. All right, everybody. See you on Tuesday. Bye.